Hey everybody, hope you've had a great week. I am back with a video about a game that has really taken off recently. It's a game that as soon as I saw some posts about it, I knew I needed to play it, so I literally just a few days ago actually, as of recording, got on my computer, bought the game, played it all the way through, and then immediately did a second playthrough to write this script and, come up with some theories. The game is Mouthwashing. It is an incredible narrative horror experience. I first heard comparisons to things like I Have No Mouth Yet I Must Scream and things like that, things of that nature, and that's when I knew instantly I need to play this game because I love that story and how, going in, unreliable narrators and having to sort of decipher the truth on your own. It's something I really, really enjoy about that story. And so hearing that comparison really turned me on to the game. And so I immediately got to work on this and I knew I wanted to do it this week. So we're going to be covering Mouthwashing, like I said. We're going to go over some theories, some small details. Basically, this is just a general overview of the game. I just realized I had this energy drink in my shot, and I'm not gonna redo the intro because it's just been that kind of week. Also, I love the game so much. I don't really cosplay, but I am really wanting to cosplay Curly at some point. I wanted to for this video, but naturally I'm at college. That's why my background is so different than it was when I first started doing this. And I have a utility jumpsuit that I got when I was younger for a Michael Myers costume when I was younger. But the type of family I'm in, if you're getting something, you get it a few sizes too large so you can grow into it. So it still fits me to this day, in my 20s. So I really thought about trying to get it and wear it during this video, but it was frankly too far. So when I get my hands on it again, I would like to do a cosplay. I just would probably post that on my Twitter, which my Twitter, link below. I'm actually fairly active on there, more and more. If you see me arguing with a privated account, that's my friend Emma, who I have mentioned briefly during my Life is Strange videos. Pay no mind to it. She's kind of just the weird voice in the back of my head yelling at me. First, we're going to get into some theories about what the crew members' real names actually are. I apologize in advance if I mispronounce any names. Curly is revealed to be Curly's surname. His first name is covered by different splats of blood, but from what we can tell, there seems to be a T. The first letter could be a C or a G. This has led a lot of people to believe that Curly's name is possibly Clint or Grant, which is interesting because I believe the developers confirmed that Curly is supposed to be British. So I don't know if Clint or Grant is which one is a more common name among British men. Either way, I feel like both of them really fit. Jimmy's surname clearly starts with a J, and that makes you wonder what it is really. I've seen some people joke that his surname must be Jimmy as well, because he's just that horrible and you can't trust him, and you can never trust someone with two first names. But it could be, I don't know, any number of things, honestly, but who cares about Jimmy? He's the worst. We know that Anya's surname ends with M-E, but the beginning of it is pretty hard to decipher. It looks like either a C-H or even a U-H. Her name being Anya sounding very sort of, in my opinion, like Russian or European in some sense. I've actually, real quick, I'm gonna, if I can, find it. There's this piece of art that I came across that I really love this interpretation of the character. I'm gonna credit the artist below. I'm gonna cut this out if I can't find the artist, but this image, I really love this piece of artwork. It's fantastic. So yeah, since Anya came up, I immediately thought of that because in my head, that's how I view her in like a realistic way. I think this person's artwork of the crew is fantastic. Swansea's starts with an H and ends with a D. This has led some people to believe that it is Harold or something along those lines. I've seen a lot of people say that Daisuke's last name is Juarez and it's spelled like this. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. And really that's the only interpretation I've found that a lot of people agree with. So I'm kind of just gonna go with the masses here. I'm not really sure what else it would be. This next theory is a little, how do I put it? This next theory is kind of a theory, it's more so just a fact. Basically, it goes that there was originally planned to be a 6th crew member. And we know this because in the Hall of IDs, when you're walking through that sort of nightmare sequence and the IDs are flying at you and they're all over the walls, there is someone's ID hidden in the bunch that's really unrecognizable. It's clearly not Swansea. It's clearly no one that we know. And this has led to a lot of debate. And I think it's very interesting. I don't know if the developers have confirmed or denied this. I vaguely remember reading while doing research for this that they did confirm that they had one planned, but they ended up cutting it down. So that's why it's sort of like a blank slate type of card. It could also just be to fill in some of the blanks in this, board, I guess. This next theory is about Swansea and the final sequence, during Judgment, when the hours are counting down to Judgment, that he is not actually chasing Jimmy in this very violent, extreme way that Jimmy is seeing it. And we know that Jimmy is an unreliable narrator. He is a horrible human being, and he wants to see things in his own way. For example, a perfect example of this is during the interaction, the first time you feed Curly the medicine, when Anya's talking to you, it's italicized when she says, "Because I know you're capable." I was actually talking to a friend of mine, and he thought it was fascinating how that was specifically italicized. And because there's no voice actors, he read it at first, when he didn't know anything about the game, as a sort of flirtatious kind of pass at Jimmy. And this is exactly what Jimmy would see it as, when in reality, Anya means nothing by it. It could even be a slight at him. I love the interpretations of Anya that in reality, she is a very strong power, I love the interpretations of Anya where she's a very strong, defiant person. I mean, even though she failed medical school so many times, she still tried over and over and over again. She's clearly a hard worker. So I like that idea of her maybe even subtly defying Jimmy by saying something like that. But all that to say, we know Jimmy is an unreliable narrator. Swansea's sort of rampage is very, very out of place for him. The last time we see him, and when you put together the events chronologically, this adds up, he is extremely sullen over the fact that he had to kill Daisuke. And it doesn't seem like... At first, I thought the reason he was flying off the handle, if we're to take what Jimmy sees as fact, it would be because of Anya. But at this point, Anya has already passed. She is in the medical bay, dead due to her suicide. So this idea that he flies off the handle because of that doesn't add up as much, because he has just gone from being extremely, depressed and upset, more focused on Daisuke than Anya, which I'm not saying that he doesn't care for Anya. I do believe he was saving the cryopod for her, or Daisuke. Really, I feel like for him it was just whoever survived. Also, the scenes themselves have that same sort of ethereal, unreal quality to them that a lot of Jimmy's hallucinations, and a lot of the hallucinations throughout the game, have. For example, he goes from, basically cornering Jimmy in the cockpit to chasing him through the hallway, through now we've got this hallucination in the graveyard. It's all over the place with, what Swansea is, like where he is, and also the way he speaks to Jimmy. He's never been fond of Jimmy, let's be clear, and that's because he knows about what happened. So, I think what truly it is, maybe Swansea did try to attack Jimmy, but I think only after Jimmy got the gun to try and kill Swansea. And the reason Jimmy would go for this gun is because Swansea is the only person on the ship to this point that can truly stand up to Jimmy. Daisuke is an intern who really doesn't know what's going on. He's completely underqualified. In Jimmy's mind, Anya is this weak, sniveling, jumpy, oh, poor woman that he doesn't believe has a fighting bone in her body. And so it makes sense why he feels, he's able to sort of deal with them, because he feels like he has power over them. Swansea is the only one he doesn't. In fact, when it comes time to get into the utility room in order to, quote unquote, stop Anya from doing something to Curly, which, by the way, the fact that Jimmy, when Anya's in the medical bay and talking, the fact that Jimmy turns to Daisuke and says, Curly's in there, what is she doing to him? Disgusts me, because he's implying that she is going to, cannibalize him, when that is what Jimmy ends up doing later while Curly is alive. That's just another moment where I was like, it made me sick. This whole game made me sick. I said to my friends after I finished that opening sequence where you crash the ship, I said, I want to vomit. I feel this heavy weight with this game, and it's fantastic, and that's an absolute compliment to this game and its atmosphere. But all that to say, Jimmy's perspective of Swansea is that he's the only one who's older than him and more knowledgeable than him and has power over him. And we know this because the only way that Jimmy knows to get Swansea out of the way when trying to get into the utility room is by drugging him with a drink. Instead of, I don't know, maybe taking the pipe on the ground or this or that, physically confronting him because he knows he'd fail. So I think what truly happened was Jimmy gets the gun, confronts Swansea, Swansea freaks out, but he's ultimately able to subdue him because Swansea is in no position to fight at this point. The other interesting theory that we're going to cover is about the game board and how it represents the crew. The game is, I've in this one forum that I was reading, people said the game is a German board game called Mensch ärgere dich nicht. I took German in high school and I was really bad at it. But in English, that's man, don't get mad. And, it's funny, I read that and I was like, that's not what it is, it's aggravation. I grew up playing the board game Aggravation. Other people know it as the board game Sorry. But either way, the objective stays true. You need to get all of your pieces around the entire board and back to your home base. And along the way, you have to knock other people off and they have to go all the way back to their home base and start over. And it's a very long and frustrating game, hence the name Aggravation. But each piece actually represents one of the crew members. So for example, green is Jimmy, blue is Anya, pink is Daisuke, and yellow is Swansea. So this is really interesting, and just so I get the dynamics right, I'm going to read it off the script. The interesting thing in chapter 13 is that all of the blue pegs, Anya, have been toppled over, the pink peg made progress, the green peg moved towards its home base, and the yellow pegs seem to be following green, which I think is very, very interesting, and I'm sure there's more details throughout the game of how it changes and at what point in time, if you go in there, how does it look different. This next one is not really a theory, more of just an interesting way to view the game. I've seen a lot of takes that outright demonize Curly for his inaction and his sort of naive way of thinking and trying to find the best in people. And this ultimately leads to Jimmy getting into a situation where he's able to take advantage of Anya. I think while yes, Curly absolutely played a role in it, I think he is ultimately supposed to be a truly gray character. He's not evil by any means, but he certainly isn't a saint. He might try to be, but he fails constantly. His choice to tell the crew about Pony Express going under, he, instead of trusting, the orders from the company or his brain, he trusts his heart and says, I can't hide this from you, I have to tell you. And all this does is lead to more and more conflict, even though he was trying his best. I believe the best way to describe Curly is with this quote. The road to hell is paved with good intentions. He wanted to help the crew by telling them about Pony Express going under. He wanted to help his friend by giving him a job. He wanted to help Anya by doing the psych eval, but he never truly realized that maybe she needed one, or maybe he needs to take Jimmy a little more seriously about some of the weird things he's saying. The point is, Curly is by no means a saint, however, he is not the full problem. At the end of the day, I believe that this story is also about corporate greed and how corporations and I guess institutions in general can sort of enable these abusive figures. Pony Express not putting a lock on the bedroom doors is insane, and that's an insane oversight. On top of that, putting all of this power in the captain and having to, use this code scanner to get the axe, get certain tools, get into the cargo bay, all these things, if the captain goes down, as we see, things quickly delve into absolute chaos. So at the end of the day, the true villain of this story, other than Jimmy, is Pony Express and its negligence, because their rules, their system, their institution is what allowed all of this to happen. Even things like hiring extremely underqualified medical staff. This is no slight at Anya, but she is underqualified. And then putting all this extra pressure of they don't get any psych evals, they have to take everyone else's psych evals. And if you look at some of the books that are in her, in the medical bay, they're all like Anatomy 101, stuff like basic entry-level textbooks, things that would really not help you at all in an emergency situation. The other thing is the fact that Pony Express supplies various weapons such as a fire axe and gun. The fire axe you can sort of justify for the goo going wrong. In fact, that's the first scene where we see or actually use the axe. But the gun, I feel like there's almost no excuse. Now, there is an old tale. I'm really into space stuff. There is sort of that old tale of Russian spacecraft having guns on board in case they landed in Siberia and needed to fend off wolves. And Alexei Leonov, the first man to walk in space, actually was almost eaten by wolves, him and his crew, his one other friend, because of where they landed and they weren't being rescued in time, apparently. Which is like, I know it's sort of a tall tale, but I think that's very interesting. So the idea of having a weapon on board isn't inherently insane. However, under the context of the game and the other negligence of this organization, this is no NASA or even the Russian space program where they had very strict rules in place. This is a company that plays very fast and loose with safety regulations. So having this gun, combined with the fact that there's only 4 cryopods, there's 5 crew members, that encourages one person to either go down with the ship and starve, or if the gun gets out, or hell, even the axe, for violence to break out in order for, the group to survive, to take out one person so the rest can live. That sort of enabling behavior is why I truly believe the real villain of this whole thing is Pony Express. Well, yes, Jimmy is definitely a villain. I'm clarifying that every step I get because I see some people defending him. Side tangent about some Jimmy defenders. I see people being like, I'd be a better captain than Curly. I'd know how to talk to Swansea. I would know, Anya would like me, things like that. Saying all these things about how they would do so much better. You sound like Jimmy. That's exactly what Jimmy is thinking throughout the entire game. That's his thought process. He believes he can do better than everyone else, and then crumbles when he realizes it takes responsibility. So just some food for thought there. The other thing that really hurts the crew as a whole, a regulation from Pony Express, is the sort of that overhanging threat of your pay being docked for the smallest errors, that your pay could be taken away in an instant if you open the crew bay and everyone looks at it, stuff like that. That sort of hanging, looming threat of your pay being docked when this is clearly a company that's hiring the most desperate of people who need that money. So all of that to say, they are encouraging a situation, a violent situation like this to break out. This next thing really honestly disturbed me. This whole game once again disturbed me, particularly Anya's character was very difficult for me to watch because of, empathizing with her and understanding some of her situation. And it was painful, especially because something I realized is that Jimmy never says sorry to Anya. He says sorry or feels guilt in some capacity for everyone else but Anya. And here's my examples. With Daisuke, he sees him in the graveyard, he has multiple hallucinations of him, he tries to save him but utterly fails. With Curly, he apologizes to him in the burning chair sequence and says that he didn't understand how much strength and responsibility being a captain actually took, and how he underestimated him, and how we can both be heroes. He begs him basically for forgiveness. Swansea, less directly, he does directly confront him and kill Swansea. However, the scene with him in the chair and also saying that he's going to fix it, he still at least pays attention to him and apologizes to him for the whole situation in a sense. With Anya, this scene never ever comes. Even in the scene where all of the walls are covered in ID cards. You want to know where Anya's is? I'll tell you one thing, it's never in plain view. Her ID card is constantly obscured by someone else's. Now, some of you might be pointing to, well, what about the scene with the ultrasound and that whole weird sequence? I wouldn't say that that's Jimmy feeling any remorse or guilt for his actions. If anything, that is his fear of consequences. The only thing he feels towards Anya is that... The reason I say this is because when you do that whole sequence with the ultrasound and you see the horse inside, you know, whatever, that to me represents how this child that Anya is carrying, when it comes, Jimmy doesn't see the fact that something he created in a sick, twisted way is coming. He sees it as the consequences of his actions coming through Pony Express firing him and docking his pay and possibly getting into more legal trouble. That's why it's a pony. That's why it's the horse, not a human being, because he doesn't see Anya or this kid as a human being. On top of that, this whole idea that he never apologizes once, he never even considers anything about her other than the consequences of what happens when she gives birth, shows that in his eyes, what he did to her is not wrong. What he did to her is okay to him. That he's justified in those actions. His other actions, everything that happened with Swansea, Daisuke, Curly, that is something, oh, I need to own up for, I'm so sorry. It's not genuine, but he believes he's gonna make it better. But Anya, he doesn't even feel the need to pretend he feels guilty about it. The only thing he feels is concern for his own well-being, which is something that makes it so much more disturbing, his character as a whole, because that is something that's so common that you see in abusers, people like Jimmy, what he did, as well as these other people who commit these sort of very, very personal, intimate crimes. They never actually feel sorry for what they did, most of them. But they'll feign it, they'll cry, they'll beg for forgiveness because they know that it's finally gonna come to get them. And that whole sequence confirms it for me, that was the intention with him. And it's deeply disturbing to me on many, many levels. And just once again, congratulations to the writers of this, because it's fantastic. I really don't know what else to say. That realization I had when going over those scenes again of how he feels zero remorse. He doesn't even see her as a human being. This is why I said this game makes me want to throw up, man. Now, I will say this next theory is a little bit of contradiction to the idea that Anya gets no representation within Jimmy's dream. However, I do think it's very interesting. During this nightmare sequence, he talks to this Polly who's on a mound of mouthwash, and it sort of taunts him. It spits his words back at him saying, "Oh, boo-hoo, poor you," things along those lines. I've seen some people interpret this as sort of Anya's wrath, Anya's true voice coming out. Especially if you interpret her first scene where she says, "You're certainly capable," as this sort of passive-aggressive, defiant moment for her. Also because he first says to her, our worst moments can't define us, which is completely disgusting to say to someone, you know, that he has abused, because the worst moment of her life is probably what he did to her. And so him saying that to her, being like, our worst moments don't define us, when in his own mind that moment has defined her in his mind as this weak, pathetic person, when in reality she's not. It's disgusting. And but anyway, she then says that to him before she commits suicide, saying, our worst moments don't make us monsters. And then finally, Polly, the statue, says that back to him, basically making fun of him and taunting him about it. It would be interesting to view that statue as sort of her wrath coming through. However, I don't know really the logistics of it, because in Jimmy's mind, like I said, he doesn't view her as a person or even an afterthought. And when he does see her directly during that hallucination scene before he eats Curly, she's like, oh, our glorious captain, blah, 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 blah. She is that idealized version that he made up in his head of her. So it makes me wonder what the full intention of that was. I certainly do believe that Anya's character is this very strong, defiant, hardworking person, and that we don't ever truly get to see that because of us having Jimmy's perspective for most of the game. So it is an interesting idea. I don't know how true it necessarily is. This next theory is something, if you follow my Twitter, you saw me tweet about this, and it frankly disgusts me that I have to say this. So, did Anya's SA really happen? Yes. Yes, it did. You don't need to see it to believe it. It is mind-boggling that when I am on TikTok or on Twitter, specifically it was TikTok, there was a post kind of discussing what had happened to her and the trauma related to it and how she behaves and how she's good representation, in a sense. One of the comments pointed out that like the top search is Anya SA scene, and how a lot of people they don't really understand the concept of Jimmy being an unreliable narrator and not being honest or truthful to himself, only seeing things the way he wants to see them. They don't understand that, and so they need that proof to be like, well, did it really happen? Did it really happen? Especially because, you know, there's a pregnancy involved, things like that. Did it happen, I guess, in a sense of, was it actually consensual? Which, no, it wasn't. Jimmy is a monster, period, end of story. He is unbelievably irredeemable. But all that to say, I do feel like I need to address this, because I've seen people discuss this at length when I feel like it's a no-brainer that this clearly happened, and that Anya isn't lying in any sense, because usually they point to scenes where it's Jimmy's interpretation of her, such as the past, I'm not saying it is one, you know, the whole "you're capable," and then the scene at the dinner table where she's like, oh, my captain. People point to that as like proof, but it's really not, because that's all Jimmy's own sick, twisted version of her, of reality, that is frankly incorrect. So, yeah. I am shocked, and I think it also says a lot about how people's willingness to believe survivors of abuse and SA at the end of the day. I mean, it doesn't help that also we have, in this fandom, there's a lot of younger people. When I say younger people, I sound like an old man. My friend jokes that I tweet like a politician, but there's a lot of people who are in their teen years who I feel like, well, yes, I'm not saying they can't grasp, you know, deep ideas. I know while at 15, 16, I was certainly a jerk, and if I could punch that version of me in the face, I would. I was still reading, you know, deep pieces of media and understanding them to the best of my ability. Now, looking back, I can understand them on a completely different level because of the things I've been through and also the realizations I've had about my life. But I'm not necessarily questioning their intelligence. I'm questioning their media literacy to understand sort of the gravity of Jimmy's character and Jimmy's perspective and how it affects the characterization of everyone in the story. There's been a lot of debate about what the horse-pony monsters are really at the end of the day. Specifically like the one in the ventilation sequence, as well as the one in the cargo hold that's blind. Real quick, I was unbelievably, I don't know if I was just tired or dumb, but I was unbelievably frustrated with the one in the vent because I at first was like, oh, okay, it's the blind one. It's the blind one again. I just need to stop moving when it sees me. And it was very unsettling how it would just turn the corner and be like, hello, pause, bah, gotcha. I do think it is an interesting sequence once I figured out like the rules of it. But anyway, a lot of people have connected them to sort of Anya in a sense, the same people who believe that Anya represents that Polly who's on the statue criticizing Jimmy, just because of how the one specifically in the vent, it gets you when, you know, it makes direct eye contact with you. And perhaps that could be interpreted as people, or maybe specifically Anya, sort of seeing through Jimmy and being like, I know what you are. And that's what truly terrifies him, is people seeing through him and through his manipulative persona. But anyway, the one in the cargo hold is specifically referred to as a monster in a few, I don't know if a few sections or what, but it's referred to as monster. I've seen some ideas, and I really agree with these, that this actually represents Jimmy, not Anya or anyone else. And the reason is, it's called a monster, and on top of that, it's blind. Like Jimmy being blind to his own actions, and that would ultimately become his downfall. I think that's very, very interesting. This next idea, quickly about Swansea, is in his name, Swan. Swans actually have a very interesting, specifically male swans, have an interesting relationship with their young. There is an idea that swans kill their young if they are dying or injured, sort of to put them out of their misery. And we learned that Swansea actually does care about Daisuke and admires him for his youth and, you know, all that. So it's not, you know, and also Daisuke is literally his intern, someone that he has to take under his wing. Get it? For him to put Daisuke out of his misery in the scene where Jimmy is trying to disinfect his wounds with mouthwash, which, by the way, when I first got to that, I took note of how Anya, when you open the thing, the boxes of mouthwash, she says, we can't use this as disinfectant, the sugar content is... I specifically remember taking note of how Anya says, we can't use this as disinfectant, it has too high of a sugar content when they open the mouthwash containers. And then when it came up that, you know, fine disinfectant when Daisuke's on the ground, I immediately ran to the medical cabinet, I ran to the medical bay, I looked all around, I'm like, I think we're out of disinfectant. And then I looked at the icon, and it was... And then I looked at the icon, and it was mouthwash, and I was like, that's not gonna work. It has too high of a sugar count. Well, it once again shows how little Jimmy thinks of Anya as a freaking person, because he blatantly ignores that, basically tortures Daisuke with this mouthwash that isn't even gonna help him. But all that to say, Swansea having Swan in his name, killing his young because they're dying of this, you know, of these wounds, makes a lot of sense. Another idea that was presented is that, you know, swans kill young based on territorial things. That in a very similar way that male bears will kill other cubs in order to basically secure their own bloodline or whatever so they can reproduce. And if you look at Jimmy as, let's say Jimmy is another territorial male, you could see Swansea putting Daisuke out of his misery as protecting him from being hurt by another territorial male, which is interesting. I kind of like the other more surface level idea that he is putting him out of his misery, representing what a swan would do. I don't know if that's entirely accurate to current studies of swan behavior, but still, I think that's an interesting interpretation. And finally, what's the deal with mouthwash? I think this is very interesting. The idea that one of the very last manned freighters in, you know, I guess, I don't know if it would be the universe or the solar system. I'm assuming maybe there's just colonies. Maybe I need to go back and check that out. But I think it's very interesting that this last crew is carrying something so simple and so mundane as just boxes and boxes of mouthwash. Nothing important, you know? And I think it is to show sort of the unnecessary... I think it's supposed to show how unnecessary. The sacrifice of the crew, the deaths, the pain, everything. How utterly useless and unnecessary it all was, because all they were doing was taking mouthwash from point A to point B. Something so trivial, nothing important. They didn't die in honor taking this all-important artifact to this thing to go there, or a life-saving medical thing. No, they all died because they were trapped on a rinky-dink ship transporting mouthwash. Yeah, I think it just represents the insignificance of this crew at the end of the day, how no one truly cares for them. The company does not have their best interests in mind. So I think that's truly the purpose of the mouthwash. I think another interpretation is how mouthwash kills 99.9% of germs, and only one crew member survived, and that crew member, this is going to sound very, very bad, but that crew member is not truly whole. He's missing his limbs. He can't even speak. He wants to die. He wants to be put out of his misery, but he isn't. So he is that 0.1% of bacteria, and you can consider humanity a bacteria or virus in the universe with how small yet destructive we are. He's that 0.1% that survives, which I think is a very tragic look at the crew as a whole. How at the end of the day, they died for nothing. Yeah, this game never fails to get me depressed. I tell you what, even though it is truly incredible, it is truly a masterpiece in storytelling, and the comparisons to I Have No Mouth Yet I Must Scream are very, very well deserved. That's another fantastic story that if you like this sort of thing, I would recommend you read. Or I believe there's a video game interpretation, like an RPG in the 90s that was made that I've heard is also very good and very true to the source material. But I do believe wholeheartedly that this game is a masterpiece, and I think it also opens a lot of conversations about institutionalized issues in our society, and also the role of, also the idea of the road to hell is paved with good intentions, how sometimes looking into someone, hoping that this person can be the best instead of looking at them for who they are can cause more harm than good. I think it opens the door to a lot of uncomfortable yet necessary conversations about our society, our lives, and our relationships. So very, very good game, very well made. I recommend everyone plays it. So yeah, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate every single one of you, and let me know, feel free to follow me on Twitter. Next week you will be back to your regularly scheduled Life is Strange content. We're going to be doing a deep dive into Nathan Prescott as a character, which I know my friend Emma on Twitter is going to be fiending for, foaming at the mouth even. So stick around for that. Let me know if you want to see any more mouthwashing or any other games that are recent, like content related to that. I love horror as a genre, or if there's any recommendations you have that are very similar to this game. So thank you guys again so much for watching. I appreciate every single one of you. So please have a good morning or evening or night or, whatever.